Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's Choose Life Cafe. We have Tom with us, and he is over at TC Communications and has years and years of experience. And I may see maybe a familiar face for you all because he has been on before, and everybody loved listening to you, Tom. And so we're excited to have you back on. You might have seen that he posted an article that he recently wrote, and he's always pushing out some great content. So that's also there as well, and we're going to be diving in and talking about that today. So welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Allie. Thank you very much.
So let's start in prayer. Jess, if you want to lead us, and then we will dive in.
I would love to. Father, thank you so much for gathering us together today, just in your name, in your step. Lord, we're so thankful for you and all that you're doing through Tom and all that you're doing through Choose Life. God, I pray that you just bless this conversation. I pray that ideas and great insight are birthed in the hearts and the minds of centers across America and across the world. Lord, we want to see restoration and we want to see healing come to the ProLife movement. We want to see movement in your direction moving forward. And we're thankful for all that you're doing in our lives and in our work. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Awesome. Well, Tom, maybe you just tell us a little bit about you for those that maybe didn't catch you the first time you were on the show.
Okay, great. Well, this is a very strange story, but I owe my career to Planned Parenthood, and maybe not the way you would think about it. Some years ago, before my business grew, I was doing subcontract work for another public relations agency, and I had very good work there, great work. And then one day they got a major account connected to a state Planned Parenthood. And somehow they knew about my position on this issue and said that, they kind of, how can I say it, made sure they didn't give me any work. And they kind of whispered it around the office, and I just kind of paid attention to the work I did do, which I really loved. It was great work. And then one day they didn't have a lot of work for me with my current clients I was handling for them. And they said, oh, we got this Planned Parenthood. It was maybe it's like a teenage sex opinion survey. And the point was, well, this doesn't deal with abortion, so you should be okay with that. And I said, no. Thank you, but it still supports, the mothership, and I don't support them and what they do. And the bottom line was they didn't have a lot of other work for me at the time. And so that contract ended. And in doing so, the clients that I was nurturing on my own, that was my direct clients, not subcontract clients, I just had to work harder. And so it was, I always say it kind of gave me the kick in the pants to, build up my direct client business. And here it is many years later. And I'm very blessed to be working with national pro-life groups across the country and helping them, and also pregnancy resource centers and such to do that. And I just really enjoy it, particularly hopefully being proactive, but also sadly sometimes dealing with crisis communications, for pregnancy resource centers.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we know that our centers do get under attack, and the pro-life organizations do get some bad press out there. And it's always great to have somebody to help join alongside that. But I want to dive into this article that you wrote, and it's pro-life pregnancy centers must remain steadfast in their mission and combat public image pro-choice activists and crafted around the abortion issue. So, there's this idea out there, I think sometimes where we're like, nobody would do that to me, right? We have some of these centers out there that are precious and that I love, and they are not equipped at all for bad press that may come their way. And when it does, it's devastating. So I would love for you to maybe talk to us about some insight that went into that article and really share with us the heart of what you were trying to convey in that.
Yeah, well, Allie, I think the heart of it was that so often, and I think it's due to mainstream media, there's no question, relatively speaking, the mainstream media has bought, sold, and packaged the pro-life message in a way that is negative, and the pro-abortion message, which is positive. So you can't get around the fact that if you do the analysis, that the general perception of the public is that there's this tension, and that, why would we do that? So the core of this article was to say, let's stay on the, for lack of a better term, offensive. Let's not be defensive. Let's focus on how we can be, proactive. And that's why we talk about, we'll probably get into this a little bit later, is to think about highlighting the positive. Because as what we know is we have the truth on our side. And the irony is we have science on our side. So often I read studies out of, Stanford or Harvard or places like that, and they confirm that at the moment of conception, we have a unique human life that's been created, right? And that, I've talked to people way above my pay grade on this, and they talk about, they've actually shown me, and here's how you can see where the arms and the heart and the legs, and I'm thinking, wow, what magnifying glass are you using? Or,
right.
But yet they're able to show that in very simple pictures. And so that's kind of what the heart of this is that we have truth on our side, but unfortunately, truth, logic, and science don't necessarily win the day. It's hearts and minds, as we know, and that's much of what your work is in working with the pregnancy resource centers and the pro-life groups across the country, and our work. So I guess the heart of this article was to say, you have to recognize the negative, not emphasize it in your own head, and focus on the positive of what you have, and it's the truth. It's not hype, it's not spin, it's not packaging, it's truth. And I think where a lot of these pro-life pregnancy centers, sometimes struggle is they're too busy doing good work to know how to communicate their good work to the outside world. And there's all kinds of constituencies that would fall into that.
Right.
Yeah, I have a kind of a offset question about that specifically. I'm a Gen Zer. I'm 22, and I've kind of noticed at least those that are close to my age seem to sort of prioritize the opinion and the work that is being released by just individuals that release their work on social media or their own blogs or things like that. And it seems as if the power of the mainstream media, at least for young people, is starting to diminish in some ways. Of course, they still hold weight, but in some ways it's diminishing. So the playing field seems to be starting to even in terms of people having the ability to share their message in a powerful way. And so in general, for the pro-life movement, how do you think that we can capitalize on this shift?
Oh, I love that, because I always joke, I've been doing this for many years, and I said, I've gone from faxes to Facebook, from telephones to Twitter, from the parlor in my living room to the parlor on, social media. So Jess, I love that question. And I think when you talk about the youngest generation, I think you're right on with that, because I think what's impacted the current generation, your generation, and maybe 10 years your senior, so to speak, has been their parents. I think or adults, maybe people in their 40s and 50s, because not to get into the whole history about messaging over the years, but so much of the academic world, so much of the parents are for this. And in some ways, what's great about what you're talking about, Jess, is that the younger generation, they're getting educated through a lot of these student groups on, I've worked with pro-life student groups at the grade school level. And so I'm thinking that is really great, because they probably have parents that are a little younger as opposed to 50s and 60s, which, kind of grew up in that sexual revolution age, my body, my choice, and all that kind of messaging. And I think it's because of a lot of the pro-life groups that now you have these parents in their maybe late 20s, 30s, 40s. They're encouraging their children to get active, and that organizations like yours, I know, Jess, you talked about how you want to reach Generation Zers with other communications, that they are now speaking to each other in language that the mainstream media, and particularly parents or the older generation, can't. So I agree with you that the fact that the feeds that they're getting in their social or direct, whatever they're going through, is now it's getting better. And here's the other thing. I just had this conversation the other day with a client. We have a situation here in Illinois where they're trying to take away parental notification of abortion. Now, in Illinois, all the surrounding states have some sort of either notification or parental consent. But in Illinois, it's only notification, and now they're trying to repeal that. Now, depending who I'm talking to, what I'm finding is when we're talking about our social messages, we're playing up the fact that, a girl cannot go into a hair salon and get her hair color changed without parental consent. She can't get her, I know my daughters wanted to get their ears pierced. We went to Claire's, place, which is obviously a young girl's paradise. And I had to fill out a form with, I don't know how many pages of disclaimers that, if she dies from this ear piercing, they're not responsible. But I had to sign it. So when we were talking about messaging on this, yes, there's something we're going to say to state legislators in the messaging about why this is bad to repeal parental notification. But on social, we're actually going to be kind of up about it. It's about really protecting our girls, protecting your sisters, protecting our daughters with, kind of bright images, not the scary, evil old predator man, trying to get a girl pregnant or getting a girl pregnant and taking her to get an abortion without parents knowing to cover up the crime. And that's the way they would do it. So that's what I find is that the new generation, or the generation you're talking about, where you're at, Jess, is they're doing that. They're finding ways that the evolution, of the pro-life messages, were literally people would chain them. They would run into an abortion clinic and they would chain themselves to the tables until the police dragged them out. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I mean, that's what they did because they thought you're murdering babies. You would stop a murder. And just knowing now that particularly with everybody having a platform on their social channels or chats, or whatever that is, that they can actually do it in a way that is engaging, inviting, and still realizing, the positive message of saving these babies and protecting these girls and women.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And Jess and I have talked about this quite a bit of, what does this new generation look like? And what does the new pro-life movement look like? We've seen this shift of activism, and now you can be at your computer and be an activist, right? Which is good and also bad because the other side can also do the same thing. So pivoting into that, we know that Planned Parenthood has some very deceptive messaging. We know that they're also very good at their messaging, right? They have a team and they have money. And so I would love for you to share maybe some thoughts around what pro-life organizations, pregnancy centers, those that might be involved in the pro-life movement, what can they do to protect themselves? What can they do to be a voice that's also being heard when there's this loud voice that's just dictating the space? How do they have a voice, and how can they protect themselves?
I think it starts with whether you're talking about something proactively or reactively. A lot of the pregnancy resource centers I work with, they often will collaborate on messaging, thinking about, for example, I'll have one pregnancy resource center, they want to be out there, right? And they want to promote their message. They want to talk about really good things. They're very active. They're very transparent. And other ones, like, we just want to do good work. But the thing that joins them both together is the potential for bad things happening. And so usually when I get a call from one of those places, either on either side, is often about preparing for crisis communications, in the sense of, like, what are the scenarios that are likely to come against us that would damage our reputation? So, for example, one of the things I mentioned in the article is about, groups like Fake Clinic. They talk about, we saw this happen in California, where California, fortunately, there was a wonderful success in overcoming that, but they were trying to tell the pregnancy resource centers, you have to promote the alternative in your facility with signage, messaging, that you can also get an abortion and refer that. So obviously that was a different crisis. Unfortunately, that the pro-life pregnancy centers prevailed. But in answering your question about what they can do, I think step one is to do an evaluation of what could go wrong and how would they communicate that. I mean, even today we had some, technical glitches in going live. And think about it. What did Jess do? He didn't sit there going, well, I guess, I don't know, what are we going to do? He said, oh, no, we're going to put a message up. We're going to tell people that we had this glitch. It's going to be recorded. You'll see it a little bit later than you maybe anticipated, and you'll get to share it with your friends at another time. So that's kind of like mini crisis communications. And that ties over to these pregnancy resource centers. They know there's a possibility that someone's going to come in undercover and record something. I had one clinic that happened. They went in and claimed abusive nurse, maybe during an exam. We know that there's going to be possibly protest in the front with signs. We know there's going to be what's the word I'm thinking of? But where they're going to maybe personally attack the leadership and trash them in the media and kind of expose, maybe do some research. And you have to find what is it at your clinic that has the potential of that coming and deciding what will you do. So, even as we think about earlier today, when Jess said, I'm going to put up this message, well, what message are you going to put up as you're waiting to figure out what's going to happen later? And so often that message is what we call a holding statement, and that you're going to say, we are aware of this, obviously not, confessing anything. And, we hold the higher standards. You've probably seen this all the time in the media. It's a very, but at least it's a holding statement. You don't necessarily bury your head in the sand. And what comes before that? Should you even react? Because often, the other side might be putting gasoline on the fire. You don't want to open up your own gas tank and start adding to the flames. So much of my work is, they say, oh, look what happened. There's this one tweet that said, this client came out of our clinic bleeding. Okay, well, let's take a look at that. Who's that person? Who are they with? As best we can, research that and say, you know what? We let it go. And then we just let it, but you have to know that in advance because,
right.
You'll see some comments and you say, well, either we're going to delete the comments on our Facebook page or we're going to respond. So it's a little bit of the preemptive, planning that I would say, what do you do practically? Where you plan out scenarios. It's the equivalent of why do you have smoke detectors and fire extinguishers and, alarm systems, because you have them there so that they're ready to serve you to bring you to safety in a short time period, as opposed to saying, what do we say now? The second thing I would say is that you have to consider your constituents and channels. So you're right. But when I started working in this business, we would think about, yes, what would the newspaper, the TV station, the radio station, what might be the news reporting something? One of the first things I do now is I start doing some searches, on social just to see, what's the trend, what are the key influencers, and then that kind of tells me, what's going on. And that might be something you might want to keep in mind as well, that you're going to look at that quickly and then say, are we going to, react with whatever messages we might have, prepared. The
Right.
third thing I would say is you have to think about first of all, we know these are all donation, support through contributions, maybe even government grants.
Right.
I work with a conservative Christian group in Chicago. And the great thing is they get really good money from the government. Now, if you look at their mission, what they do, you would say, really? And they just manage to stay in that sweet spot of doing the good work and also understanding their constitutional rights that they're entitled to this grant funding. However, if something hits, you can be sure that a politician who helps administer that funding from the state, maybe it's an abstinence program or something like that, is going to get on the funding source, maybe the grant, and say, you know what, look what happened here. So you have to kind of work your way back and look at the legal angle, obviously the public interest angle from the media, the social, and decide how each of those constituents or audiences will get this message.
Right. Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, I was in Orlando this past September for the CareNet conference. And as we were pulling up, we saw this huge it was an 18-wheeler, and on the side of this 18-wheeler, it was endorsing or promoting, it was an ad for exposing fake clinics. So they put it right in front of the Disney World, Hotel. And so I found it so fascinating. I had actually never heard of exposed fake clinics before that. And it kind of wanted me to, it prompted me to look into their branding, what they're saying, what are they building their messaging on. And I find it so fascinating, just because I feel like the pro-choice side, if they truly understood what pregnancy centers were doing, they really wouldn't be opposed to what's happening. I mean, providing free resources and encouraging women. I mean, that doesn't sound too controversial to me. But I just found it so fascinating. So with these groups, these exposed fake clinic-esque groups, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the reactionary language that you're talking about. And I know you touched on this, but what are some specific things that PRCs can avoid doing? Just getting really practical. Like, have you seen some PRCs make some mistakes in responding to some of these attacks? And what comes to mind whenever you encourage them to avoid?
Yeah, well, I would say there's two things. I know, actually, there's one PRC I know that actually has, when they do messaging on, let's say their website, and they do their Google, and you know this better, Allie, than I do,
Yeah.
all the SEO work.
Right.
They put the bulk of their money into reaching messaging that's very positive for the girls in crisis pregnancy. They also, I've actually had some that have a separate website, which is more donor related. Now, again, it's not that one's going to have like all these, fluffy teddy bears and babies and onesies and free formula, and the other one's going to be like, give us money to overcome Planned Parenthood. But I do see them making sure that both are just as compassionate, even though obviously one is focusing on the donor focus, which I thought was a really great proposal, because that's the one they tend to use for fundraising. And then the other one they tend to use more for their public image. Of course, the smaller clinics kind of have to do both, right? They don't have the money to even build a second website, although I'm sure you can help them figure out how to, best do it. So that's one thing where I think they make the mistake of they put content into either social or website that really is something that's going to come back to hurt them. So I would say that's that's one thing I can think of off the top of my head, Jess. I think the other mistake they make is they sometimes align, and I can't mention names here, but they might align with an ultra, for lack of a better term, far-right organization that supports their mission as pro-life, but everything else that organization does is not ideal. Okay, so I'm thinking of one where the organization that is very family-friendly, all the stuff that we would consider to be good, solid, traditional values, whether it's regards to all the hot button issues, they align with them, but then they get this dotted line that goes connected back to that organization. So if that organization calls Planned Parenthood a bunch of Nazis, which I'm not advocating, okay, it comes back to bite them. And because there's not a solid black line, and quite frankly, the dotted line is pretty faded. Mm-hmm. But so they have to think about that. Who are they aligning with? And I've seen that come back to hurt some of them, only because maybe they granted an interview with a podcast, and I'm all for podcasts for unique audiences, but then it comes back. So I think the thing that I've seen, as we've noticed, how a tweet from 5 years ago can bring down the CEO of a major browser, right? How can that impact the pro-life groups? And then I think the other side of the coin, Jess, is these particularly as we were talking about this a little bit before we got started about, social, well, we talked about this story about social media and the younger generation, is you have to make sure that you have a very strong social media policy, at least for the people who are working in your team and on your volunteers. And this is a whole legal matter, which I won't go into because, again, I work with lawyers all the time, but I don't is, coming up with that social media policy for your employees. Now, again, we're all about free speech, right? Which is why we want to have the free speech of pro-life advocates as equal to, and as we would hope, greater than the pro-abortion speech. However, I think that's a mistake that they make, is that people speak on behalf of their organization or what they've done, and this is easy to find, or misinformation is easy to find. So that's the other thing I found, is that they don't address that, because it's just in today's world. Years ago, it was easier to say we have a primary spokesperson and a primary communications director, and that's it. And you can control the message for your clinic. That's not true now, and if anything, it's getting more splintered. And the other side is using, just trying to find that one tweet, that one Facebook post, that one graphic image. We know it's interesting, Jess, when you mentioned the fake clinic truck in front of the conference you went to. I get it. There are advocates who will promote, let's say, graphic images of abortion to show the shock of it. Now, on a personal level, I'm a yes and person, because when you look at the horror of the Holocaust, and I've been to Auschwitz and I've seen the remnants of the Holocaust in Germany, that was in Poland, Auschwitz. And then, not everybody's going to get to Auschwitz to see that. And so when they started putting those media images in the news, obviously now in history books, and it's pretty sad to see the piles of bodies of Jewish people. And I've walked through the gas chambers, and I've seen the furnaces, and that had an impact. However, I think that's not a place for our centers. And even if they like those things, now again, that might be a free speech issue we don't want to get into today, but I think we just have to be sensitive to that. We want to, it's the old expression, you want to draw someone with honey, not with something bitter. And the sweetness is, we care about you, we love you and your baby. And so if they stray off of that, it's a bigger deal now, because of how that can be found out and how that can be leveraged against the center.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's so true, is we now all have a platform. What you said about, you used to have that communications director and maybe one other person that was sharing the narrative of your organization. And now anybody within the organization can share a message and is seen as a voice for that organization. So I think that that is super true, and especially for our centers, right? We hope that everybody has good intentions. I'm curious, and I actually just had a center who reached out about this. They had a disgruntled employee, right? So the employee had worked for them and left and made some huge accusations, and they were in a panic, not sure what to do or how to handle it, and how to, or afraid that the public's going to find out. What would your advice be in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, that's where you have a team of three, right? You have the internal folks, you have your internal communications person or the outside communications consultant, and your lawyer. Because now you're getting into labor relations, all kinds of disclosures that, not necessarily HIPAA per se, but now you're getting into that. And I think that's a quick huddle. Now, it does go back to what I said earlier. You probably should be talking to your lawyer about what you're going to say. And that would be one of the holding statements that you would have. A disgruntled employer or employee, I should say, goes out there. At least in my experience, I think we had one. I'm trying to think of one where we had, and basically we had to focus on. It's a term that we use in PR. It's called talking past it. What I mean by that is, if someone were to call you and say, "Well, let me tell you what our clinic does," because as opposed to what we don't do, which is obviously what this other person is saying, because you don't gain anything by addressing that directly. You have greater leverage and control over the messaging of saying, "Oh, thank you for your call. let me tell you what we're doing, and that anytime something that may not fit into that standard that we have in our mission, vision, policy, we're concerned about it, and we're going to address it. Because once you get beyond that, you're going to be in trouble. Particularly with somebody in the mainstream media. There used to be an expression, and I don't know how many people still even think about this, is that no comment equals guilty. I don't believe that. I don't know if I'm contrarian, or maybe all my peers would agree with me. I don't know, but I would say that either a minimal, many times when this happens with our clients, and we're on the fly, we might just craft a 50-word statement, and that's it. And we might even link to maybe our mission or vision or quality control if we have that on our website, and that's it. And that's all we're going to say. Because the reason I say that is, if you haven't had a chance to get the lawyer in the room to talk about this potential issue, because now there's going to be lawsuits and all kinds of accusations, is anything you say can and might be used against you in a court of law. And so what you said to be defensive, saying that never, I'm just making this up, that never happens at our clinic, everybody's 100%, that person's a liar, I don't know if all of a sudden the emotion gets in there, which hopefully it wouldn't. All that can be used against you once they start getting into depositions and discovery, if it involves in litigation, or even potentially if it's considered a criminal.
Yeah, that's really good. I want to ask something personal, just something that maybe just share your opinion on this. I know that you work really closely with centers and just with others in this space, and you probably have one of the best pulses of kind of where we are and maybe where we're going. So share a little bit about just your forecast for the pro-life movement as we move forward and innovate out of 2020. Do you see a hopeful future? Do you see a future with more challenges than we see now? Where do you think that we're going?
Oh, well, I think it's the best time in my life to be in the pro-life movement. and the reason I say that is now this is going to sound a little strange, but I'm going to say it, and I don't want to be too political, we know administrations have changed in Washington. I'm not going to name names. We hope that everybody knows, and people who would be hardcore, traditional values would feel, oh boy, we're in trouble, right? And I read a commentary where someone said this change could really be the best thing for us. And you go, really? And he addressed a lot of the issues, all the hot button issues that we would be concerned about. And he did address the issue of pro-life and abortion, particularly abortion. And what he said that if you look at the various administrations, and we'll just say that there were ones you would consider to be more pro-life than others, even if you go back, we'll say 20 years, so to speak. So, whether you're going back to the 1980s, the 1990s, the past decade, sadly, millions of babies were lost every year, regardless of the administration. So does this administration, is there going to be more loss or less? I don't know. Obviously, we pray against it, and we pray for our leaders. My family prays for leadership, federal, state, city, in our neighborhood. But what excites me about the future, Jess, is how organizations are, and again, a lot of these groups, whether it's, 40 Days for Life, or whether it's Sidewalk Advocates for Life, or Pro-Life Action Ministries, or, I can go through the list, and obviously they have support with networks across the country. When I look at how they are messaging, so for example, how I've seen them go from talking to the adults, to talking on the college campuses, to talking to the grade school, and how even, my girls, as soon as they could really read or write, having their signs and marching in the March for Life Chicago, and just being diehard. At age 12 and 10, my daughter's writing to the state legislators about the life issues that we care about in Illinois. That's what gives me hope, because these organizations, and obviously what you're doing and helping them message, for the pregnancy centers and the other pro-life marketing that you do and we do with ours, it's pushing it down because we know there's often a lag before you get an improvement. So regardless of who's going to be the administration in 10 years or 20 years, when these young folks who are, I don't know, Jess, what comes after Generation Z? Do we go back to A? I'm not,
No, I think it's, I can't remember, but we don't go back to A.
Oh, okay. So when I look at this, I get excited because what's going to happen is as the 30-year and 40-year-old parents who obviously were starting to be influenced, and folks like my daughters and other daughters and children are being influenced, these groups are now equipping the youngest of the young to be active, and then they're the ones that are going to be on the front lines, and they're the ones hopefully are going to be involved in legislation and places like that in 20 years. And whether the laws change or not, it doesn't matter, because it's just like the administrations in Washington. They're going to change. And sad, last 20 years, we still had abortion. Sadly, millions lost. So it's not about the administration. It's about the boots on the ground, the people on the front lines. And those are getting stronger, and the tools are getting stronger for them to communicate. I work with some pro-life organizations, and they just make it real easy to come up with the packaging, the messaging, to share, so that even the newbie, so to speak, can figure out how to do this and get this out to their networks. You think about, even Facebook has their kids messenger, and the kids are going back and forth, and they have an opportunity to do that as well. So an answer, I know it's a long answer to a short question, Jess, but that's what excites me, is that the youngest of the young are being equipped. And if we can keep this momentum going at the grade school level, at the high school level, at the college level, and we all know the ministries are working on all those levels, once they get out at 22 or whatever it is, they finish their undergraduate and move into the workforce, they're going to be a force that is just going to keep this momentum going.
I love that, and just love that narrative, right? To think that in 20 years our kids are going to be running this country and know it. And Jess has heard me tell the story. I tell it over and over, but it's one of my favorites. I was at March for Life, probably 5 or 6 years ago now. And I was there with high school students, and we went to the Holocaust Museum. And so they go and they tour it, and we're walking back, and one of the high school kiddos said, "Hey, Allie, do you think there'll be a museum like this for abortion?" And I was just stopped dead in my tracks. Like, A, that connection had been made, but B, that these high schoolers 100% know and believe that they will see a day when we see what's happening, right? Science is now improved, and they know the facts, right? It's not a political stance, it's a justice issue. And I think we've seen that shift too, which is exciting, that it's moved away from religion in a sense, right? That's still true to who we are, but just from a standpoint of science and justice, that's there. So,
well, I'll tell you another, talk about personal stories. There's an organization, it's called Teen Pack. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's basically, it gets young people to go to their state capital from a Christian worldview to understand how the legislative process works in their states. And when my daughter participated, it's a one day, they have a 1 day and a 4 day program, but they actually have to create a platform, have a campaign manager, messaging. So they have all this, they have their mini campaign.
right.
There's enough kids, but they can have 3 or 4 campaigns. It happened to be that my daughter was chosen to be the candidate for governor of Illinois. And so when they were coming up with their platform, I can't remember, but of course, this is what I would remember, especially for today's webinar. When she was going through all of her talking points and key messaging, the one that she really got fired up about was just, and we're going to abort abortion.
I love it.
Yeah, and the great news is she actually, among all the people in the room, she got voted governor. So it's already getting to her ego that she's now, maybe the future governor of Illinois, at least based on this particular point. But that's what got me excited. a 12-year-old is, that was her platform and she was proud of it. And her
Right.
peers, I don't know if that's the one that got her the vote to win, but I think it is.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That fires me up. I think that is something that we can all cling on to and just be encouraged with throughout the week. So I guess that wraps us up. But Tom, this was one of my favorite cafes. I think this may be my favorite. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. Just the insight that you bring is so great. And we pray that each and every center that hears this conversation is blessed and encouraged and empowered to move forward, handling these difficult conversations. So Tom, bless you. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Allie.
You're so welcome. And one quick lesson, if there is a center out there that wants to connect with you or learn more, read more about what you're doing, where can they go?
Sure. Well, they can certainly go to our website, which is TC, like Topcat, PR, like publicrelations.net. So tcpr.net. Feel free to give me a call. My office number is 312-422-1333. Certainly, you're welcome to email me, tc@tcpr.net. And by the way, I always welcome that, what I call a 15-minute discovery call, in the sense of like, this happened. And usually within 15 minutes, I can kind of give them an idea of what they may or may not want to do, particularly in a crisis situation. Because the good news is, I always tell people, if you have a great reputation and you're doing good work, I always use the example of what I call a reputation tank, that if your tank is full, you take a hit, it might go down a little bit, but you can build it back up. And so I often talk people off, the fear ledge, only because, the initial reaction is shock, but at the same time, it's sort of like when you go to the doctor and you say, oh my gosh, what's this black spot in my leg? And you go, well, it's a mole. People get moles. It's not a bad mole. It's just a mole. Oh yeah, I had this since I was 5 years old. Okay. So I'm always welcome to, do that, because in most cases, the fear is greater than the reality. And if there is some reality there, we can touch upon that. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Tom, and thanks to our centers. And I'm sure we'll have some folks that are reaching out to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Allie. Thank you, guys.